Hi, I'm Dr. Danny Homer, and today we're going to go over the GI map comprehensive stool analysis. It is by Diagnostic Solutions Lab, and why it's so unique and cool is that it takes your stool sample and it pulls out different microbes, and it will let us know how many microbes per gram of stool are in your gut, coming out in your feces. And why this is important is because certain things can overgrow, which can cause a lot of problems, which we'll go through as we go through this. And then there's also instances where it can be too low, and that can be problematic as well. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to a sample report, and we'll go from there. So this is the GI map. This is the first page of it called pathogens. I'm going to just narrow this out here a little bit. And pathogens are going to be things that should be transient. So this is going to be stuff like food poisoning, traveler's diarrhea, basically some of these bugs that we're going to come into contact with. And if our immune system is maybe preoccupied with something else, or we're, under a lot of stress because we're traveling, we might get sick from these, typically, a couple weeks at the most. But if we have some underlying issues that are going on in the background, these may become more problematic. So some of the things you want to think about, like Campylobacter, that's from raw chicken a lot of times, and sometimes even other sources of meat. C. difficile, so everyone's heard of C. diff. This is really common in nursing homes, hospitals, any of those nosocomial infections. Basically, like when your immune system is already depressed because it's trying to fight something else, and then boom, you get hit with C. diff. I also find this a lot of people that have decreased stomach acid, so that's another reason why that narrative of lowering your stomach acid is not a good thing. Salmonella, we've all heard of that one, from chicken. And then we have down here some parasitic pathogens. So some of these things you can pick up from food, you can pick up from water sources, giardia. You see that a lot more after summertime. People have been in rivers and lakes and all that kind of stuff. So next page, that page, we hopefully, our body's able to fight by itself. Next page is going to be H. pylori to start it, or Helicobacter pylori. So everyone's heard of this, and actually 50% of the population is carrying this. Some people are asymptomatic, but for people that it's problematic with, you're going to find things like dyspepsia or like indigestion, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and even lower GI stuff if it's been chronic, like constipation, bloating, and a slew of other bad things. This can cause eventually ulcers, gastritis, and certain these strains, these virulence factors are positive. When they're positive, you have a higher rate for things like cancer in the stomach. So very important that we pay attention to this. This is probably one of my most treated issues in the population. So it can also cause a lot of skin issues, joint pain, and then also mineral deficiencies like magnesium, zinc, calcium, that kind of stuff, and low B12 and iron, because what happens is H. pylori does not like an acidic environment. So it releases something that lowers your stomach acid, and then it can stay in there. But the problem with lowered stomach acid is that then you're not going to absorb these minerals that we need for all the other processes in our body. You can't break down protein as well, so you're not going to be getting protein. And yeah, it causes a lot of issues. So typically this is from fecal contamination, but it can also be oral to oral, and it's very easily spread within families. So if you have a family member that's had this in the past and you have some of these symptoms, highly likely that you are also suffering the same fate. And then we'll roll down to our commensals or keystone bacteria. Basically, this is our microbiome as we think of it. So these are some really popular strains that we look for, because things like Akkermansia have a lot to do with our metabolic effects. So if you have abdominal fat, obesity, insulin resistance, and this is very low like it is in the test, that is a problem. If we fix this, that should improve or at least help with that. Escherichia, which is the same as Escherichia coli. It's in the same family, but this is actually a good guy. It produces vitamin K and B12. So if this is really low over here, you're not going to be producing B12 and vitamin K. Vitamin K helps us clot blood. B12 is this energy. So we can see that a lot of these things are important and, problematic for people who have them on the lower end. The fecal bacterium presnutii, it is a butyrate producer. Butyrate is anti-inflammatory. So if you are having a lot of inflammation and this is low, that is something we need to look at. Same thing with the Roseburia. So there's a lot of information we can grab here. We see some of this overgrown sometimes. We can start to assume that means because the stomach acid isn't working well. So we can grab a lot of information from what these bacteria are doing based on research. And then we go over to the bacteriophylla. So this is 90% of our microbiome is the Bacteroides and the Firmicutes. And when both are high, that means, again, like if we had these both in the high end, then we would start to think, okay, we maybe are not breaking down things and things are overgrowing. So you look back at the stomach acid, pancreatic function, all that kind of stuff. If we are low across the board, then I'm thinking that we need to do some serious gut healing. That's when you're going to start getting intestinal permeability or leaky gut, food sensitivities, allergies, all that stuff, because we don't have a good barrier to help in our gut keep that microbiome protects our immune system. And if this ratio is bad, then we're looking at increased caloric extraction from foods, which means you're going to get more calories from the food, which then is going to deposit more fat, inflammation, obesity, all that fun stuff that so many people are facing these days. Next up is the opportunistic and overgrowth microbes. So bacillus is going to be one of those things they're going to find in nature. It's a spore-based protein or microbacteria. And so you can get that. You need some of this. This undetectable limit, we don't want to see with some of these good bacteria. So Enterococcus family, if this is getting high, then again, we're looking back at that digestive dysfunction. Do we have low stomach acid? What's not breaking down? Or under high stress? And that's causing our stomach to not be able to break things down. Morganella is going to be really nasty. It releases histamine, which is responsible for allergies. It also can release LPS, which is very inflammatory to our guts and kind of keeps that leaky gut cycle going. And then we look at Pseudomonas, same thing with the LPS and the methyl activation. This is one of those things that we find in celiac a lot because it actually kind of perpetuates on gluten. It likes gluten. So if you're celiac and you're still not doing very well despite pulling gluten out, we might have one of these problems in our gut of this overgrowth of bad bacteria that was probably there before you ever got to being celiac. Some other things, the Staphylococcus and Streptococcus family, these are going to be from the mouth. And so when we see them overgrown, again, we're thinking that we don't have enough stomach acid. The stomach acid is not killing these guys and knocking them out before they get into our small intestine. The methanobacteria group, these are archaea, which cause constipation. And this can also be an indicator that our gallbladder isn't functioning very well if these guys are able to overgrow. Now we look down at the inflammatory and autoimmune related bacteria. Citrobacter can be related to urinary tract infections as well as rheumatoid arthritis. Klebsiella, again, this is another one from the oral cavity. So we can look at the stomach acid. Why isn't, what's going on with the stomach acid? Maybe you have some poor oral hygiene. Are you not brushing and flossing like you need to? Eating too many sugars and it's fermenting in your, or it's overgrowing in your mouth and you're having problems from there. It can also cause a lot of inflammation and joint pain. Mycobacterium avium subspecies paratuberculosis. Yeah, exactly. This one has been indicated with Crohn's, RA, type 1 diabetes, psoriasis. So basically, if you have these autoimmune related bacteria and you have an autoimmunity, it's good to not have these grow over because when they grow over, your immune system is going to attack them. And then it can attack these certain tissues in your body. And then we have the Proteus family. Those are known to those are known to be promoting, there we go, of RA and spondyloarthropathies like that. These are just some of the commensals and see if they're overgrown. That can kind of tell us some other stuff. They should be there, but they should not be in certain amounts. Now we're going to move over to Candida and the fungi and yeast families. So a lot of times when we're seeing these overgrowths, it means that something has come in there and allowed these to overgrow because we do have some Candida in our bodies. So one first thing I think of is antibiotic use, stress, also a high sugar or high carb intake, or even fungi. And that can be anything fermented, like even anything that has brewer's yeast, baker's yeast in it. Overeating all those things can feed into this loop. You're also going to see this when people have a decreased immune system. So if you have dysbiosis, which is when these bacteria up here are not doing well, if they're too low or they're out of balance, that can set you up for some candida. Also, you're going to see with this a lot is yeast infections, across the board. You might have them in the folds of your skin. It might be vaginal yeast infections, people that struggle with this for a long time. You can have a lot of GI symptoms, joint pain, fatigue, skin conditions. It's one of those things where candida affects everyone a little bit differently. So it's good to, figure out exactly what your level is so we can get in there and kill it off. And then after we get rid of it, you'll be able to see what symptoms it was perpetuating. And these other fungi are similar in nature. And then we drop down to the viruses. These are both in the herpes family. They are going to be autoimmunity triggers as well, RA, lupus, that kind of stuff. Parasites is next. So we're going to have protozoa and worms. Protozoa, you're going to see some diarrhea, nausea, a lot of different things. They're going to be kind of similar to the pathogens on the first page. This Pentatrichomonas hominis can also be perpetuating vaginosis. So if you have some bacterial vaginosis or something like that, that could be part of the picture. And then we get down to the worms. So we got hookworms, and then we have roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm. So worms can show up on this as well, and we need to get rid of those because they are parasitic. They are feeding on our bodies. And then the last area here is going to be the intestinal health markers. This is basically looking at how well our digestive tract organs are working. So the first one here is steatocrit. Basically, it tells us how much fat is going to be in our stool, and we want it to be in that under DL. That means that our gallbladder is working well. It's releasing bile. It's breaking down fat, so fats aren't occurring in our stool. Fats should be pulled back out in the small intestine so we can use them, because fats are important for so many things in our body. Fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K, all those are really important to our overall health, our immune health. And so if you're not metabolizing fat very well, if you're not freeing that fat up, you're not going to be able to digest these really important vitamins because they're fat soluble. They need fat to attach to be absorbed. So that's all I have to say about that. But gallbladder function is dysfunction is very common, and the common fix is to just take it out, which is not a good idea. Elastase 1, this is going to be pancreatic function. Basically, it's telling us how many enzymes, or the quantity of enzymes that are being pushed out by our pancreas. And we want this to be in the 750 range, or over 750. So that one looks nice. Next one is beta glucuronidase. So this is an enzyme, and basically what this tells us is that there are going to be, when it's high, that we are not getting good excretion in our livers. And this is going to be, particularly, we see this a lot with estrogen dominance. So if this is really high, that means we're having higher circulating estrogens because we're not excreting them well. This can be due to dysbiosis and a few other factors. Occult blood, this is pretty, straightforward. We don't want blood in our stool. We actually look at the specific concentration when we do find it. It's not just a positive or negative. So we can actually, grade this on how bad it is. And when we look at this, you're thinking ulcer or some kind of upper GI bleed. It can also be an indicator of irritable bowel disorders, cancer, polyps. So, this could also just be from, some kind of hemorrhoid or maybe a menstruation. But typically the clinical picture will kind of let us know if this is relevant or not, as well as the amount. And then secretory IgA, this is basically how our immune system is functioning in our GI tract. And we want it, this is a Goldilocks one, where we want this in the middle, in the green. If it's too low, that means that our immune system is chronically depressed and it's not going to be able to fight. If it's too high, then that means our immune system is constantly fighting something, and that's, eventually probably going to lead to it putting out. Anti-gliadin IgA, this is basically our immune response to gluten. So again, if this is on the higher side and secretory IgA is high, we can probably deduce that that's going to be due to some of that food allergies. This eosinophil activation protein is basically how activated this protein, the eosinophil is. And this will tell us if we have some chronic inflammation. This is also an indicator of some food allergies. And then we have calprotectin, which is a measure of how inflamed our colon is. Again, that will tell us like how bad an infection, if we have an infection going on, or IBD, cancer, food allergies, all these kind of things. Again, this comes into the clinical picture. And then zonulin is an add-on. I typically don't test this because it is not an accurate test. It's kind of up and down throughout the day, so we can get a misleading read. I actually like a blood-based test called the Cyrex Array 2 for that if I'm suspicious. And then it also gives us basically the antibiotic resistance genes, tells us if we should be using certain antibiotics or not, amoxicillin, etc., in order to kill off anything should we need antibiotics. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. Otherwise, I would love to work with you and help you with your gut issues.